am a little ditzy all the time, and my mind is often hazy. 3 years ago, I bring home a handsome drunk guy in a daze. After he wakes up and stares at me for a while, he suddenly says, "Let's get married." I do not feel like thinking too much, so I nod. Just like that, I spend 3 years as the wealthy Nolan Steele's wife. I am free to shop as I please, and I live in a luxury villa. I just find out I am pregnant, and have not had time to tell Nolan yet when he hands me a divorce agreement. I have gone bankrupt. This is the last sum of money. Take it and leave. At that moment, a few lines of comments suddenly appear before my eyes. Whoa. Nolan's first love, Celia Sanders, has returned from abroad. Is he pretending to go bankrupt just to dump Lyra, so that he can chase after his true love? He got drunk back then because Celia left the country. Lyra is just a substitute. Oh, so I'm just a substitute. I nod slowly and say, okay, let's get a divorce then. The light in his eyes instantly goes out. I look at him, feeling like there is something I have forgotten to say. Forget it. I will say it when I remember. Nolan Steele pursed his lips as he slid an agreement and a pen across the table to me. His eyes were a little red, and his fingers tapped twice against the edge of the table. That was his tell whenever he was nervous. I looked at the agreement. Instead of reaching for the pen, I reached over and touched the back of his hand, which rested on the table. I said, "Your hands are freezing." He trembled slightly, but he didn't pull away. Without even glancing at the terms of the agreement, I picked up the pen, ready to sign. Nolan pressed down on my hand. Wait, at least read it before you sign. He started going through the agreement with me, clause by clause. The house would be mine, the savings would go to me, and any debts under his name would have nothing to do with me. He'd even set up a fully funded trust on my behalf to make sure I would be financially secure in the future. Comments started floating past my eyes like a live stream chat. Holy crap. Is this divorce agreement all in her favor? I dare you to say I'm wrong in calling him the best guy in the world. But I get the feeling he really is broke now. No way. In the original story, the male lead ends up loaded later. I was practically seeing stars by the time Nolan was done explaining. I said, I don't get any of that. The bottom line is I just need to sign, right? I moved to sign again. Once more Nolan stopped me. His Adam's apple bobbed. When he spoke, his voice was rough. There's one last thing. Getting divorced doesn't mean we're cutting ties completely. If you ever need my help with anything, just ask. I stared at him, puzzled. But you're drowning in debt. What could you possibly help me with? Nolan was at a loss for words and lowered his head. I thought back over the last 3 years. No matter how busy he was, he would always text me goodnight. Any dessert I casually mentioned would show up in the fridge the next day. Whenever I stumbled home drunk, the light in the entryway would always be on. My heart suddenly softened. I looked at him and said seriously, if you really end up so broke you can't even afford to eat, come to me. I'll take care of you. Nolan's head snapped up. His eyes turned even redder than before, and he swallowed hard a few times before he finally managed to murmur, okay. The comments rolled by again. What's with her attitude? He literally gave her everything. My heart aches for Mr. Steele. He still thinks he's not good enough for her. Where's his true love? Come and comfort him. This lady doesn't have her head screwed on right. Nolan told me he'd found work on a construction site. He would be doing physical labor. The pay was good, and meals and housing were included. He was leaving right away. He stood by the door with a suitcase in hand and looked back at me. His lips parted like he wanted to say something, but he ultimately stayed silent. Then he opened the door and walked out. The moment the door clicked shut, the comments exploded. Physical labor? Is he for real? From CEO to laborer. Why do I kinda wanna laugh? Don't. This hurts to watch. Wait, so he really did go bankrupt? Why else would he be doing physical labor? I headed back to the bedroom. Nolan's presence was everywhere. In the closet, his dress shirt still hung in a perfectly neat row. On the nightstand sat the business magazines he had to read every night. In the bathroom, his toothbrush was still next to mine. I lay on the bed and thought about the past 3 years. I remembered how Nolan had once stayed up all night fixing the music box I'd smashed. Whenever I woke up hungover, there would always be warm water and anti-hangover tablets by the bed. Every time he came home from a business dinner, no matter how late it was, he would go to the guest room to shower and wash up first so the smell of alcohol wouldn't bother me. As my mind drifted, a wave of nausea suddenly hit me. I ran into the bathroom and dry heaved. When the feeling finally passed, it occurred to me that I'd forgotten to tell Nolan I was pregnant. The comments turned frenetic again. Nolan's true love is here. She's at the villa's gate. I walked over to the window. Down by the wrought iron gates stood a woman in a white dress with flawless makeup. I opened the gates and the door. The woman gave me a once-over, then smiled knowingly. So you're Nolan's wife? She paused. Sorry. Ex-wife now. I leaned against the doorframe and yawned. And you are? She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and started introducing herself. Her name was Celia Sanders. Between the lines, she made it clear that she and Nolan had grown up together. They were practically childhood sweethearts. She also said that he'd gotten drunk that night 3 years ago because she'd left the country. Now that she was back, of course he had to get divorced. The comments went wild again. Celia is so pretty. Lyra West, time to feel insecure. Are you guys blind? Let's be honest here. Lyra is better looking than Celia. No girl on girl hate. Also, why do I feel like they don't look alike at all? Same here. Is Lyra really just Celia's stand-in? Celia pulled a photo out of her bag. It was an old picture of her and Nolan back in high school. The two of them were standing side by side. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes were visibly much softer than usual. Celia's tone was gentle, but there was a sharp edge of mockery in her gaze. He's never loved you. You're just a replacement. I stared at the photo for 3 seconds. He was a little chubbier back then than he is now. His face was rounder. Celia froze. I added, "Thanks for telling me all this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known what he looked like in high school. Can I keep the photo? I'd like a souvenir." The comments started buzzing. That's what you took from all this? I'll never understand Lyra's thought process. But why is this weirdly satisfying? Celia just got shut down so hard. I'm screaming. Celia's expression darkened, and she said coldly, "You really are something else. But you know what? It doesn't matter since Nolan has already chosen me. Do you know why he left the villa to you? Because he's about to move into my place." I tilted my head, thinking it over. Oh, good for him. At least he won't have to sleep at the construction site anymore. Manual labor is exhausting. My voice was sincere and showed no hint of jealousy. Celia was utterly speechless. As she turned to leave, she tossed one last line over her shoulder. "People like you deserve to get dumped." The door swung shut. I leaned back against it and slowly slid down into a squat. It wasn't that I wasn't sad. It was just that my sadness always came half a beat later than others. I rested a hand on my abdomen, which was still flat. I whispered, "Sweetheart, it looks like your dad's off to be someone else's father now." I zoned out for a while, then picked up my phone. I wanted to text Nolan to tell him I was pregnant. I just unlocked the screen when the comments suddenly flooded in. Oh my God, Mr. Steele really is working at a construction site. He's got blisters on his hands. I actually checked ahead again. Nolan really does end up filthy rich. Can someone explain what's going on? Can't help you. I want to know too. Celia just called Nolan and asked for his address. She's driving to the construction site right now. I stared at the comments flying past before me, completely forgetting what I'd been about to do. I suddenly felt a little empty inside, so I walked over to the wine cabinet, thinking I would grab a bottle. The comments floated past. Seriously? If Lyra doesn't want Nolan's baby, she can just get an abortion. There's no need to drink on purpose. Damn, she's evil. Right? She's pregnant, and Nolan doesn't even know yet. He doesn't have a kid later in the plot, so this one's definitely not gonna make it. My hand froze in midair. Silently, I put the bottle back and locked the cabinet. Then, I sat down on the couch and started wondering what I should do about the baby. My phone suddenly buzzed. It was a message from Nolan. "Remember to eat dinner. Don't drink on an empty stomach. Don't stare at your phone in the dark and don't stay up all night." I stared at the screen for a long time. All of a sudden, I couldn't bear the thought of getting rid of this baby anymore. A week later, I got a text from the bank. Nolan had transferred some money to me and included a note with it. Half a month's salary. Use it for now. It wasn't a lot, and the amount was oddly specific. I stared at the message, zoning out for a while. The comments exploded. So he literally only left himself enough for cheap meals every day. His hands are covered in blisters, yet he's still thinking about his ex-wife. I dragged myself up from the couch. I touched my still flat abdomen and said slowly, "Sweetheart, I think your dad is about to starve." Then I walked into the kitchen. I'd basically never set foot in here for the past 3 years. Before, it had always been Nolan cooking all kinds of fancy dishes for me. I only knew how to make instant mac and cheese, and I still managed to burn it sometimes. I looked up a recipe. While following it, I almost cut my hand. I also forgot to add salt. But after 2 full hours of chaos, I finally managed to make a pot of broth. Then I went to the pharmacy to buy iodine and Band-Aids. From the scattered hints in the comments about the new development zone in the south of the city, I hailed a cab and headed over. The construction site was full of dust. I stood at the entrance in my lounge dress and slippers while holding a thermal food carrier, standing out like a sore thumb. The comments started teasing me. Why does she actually look kind of cute dressed like this? Just as I was craning my neck and looking around, a white sedan pulled up. Celia stepped out, carrying a delicate lunchbox. She saw me too. Her smile faltered for a second, then smoothed back into elegance. She walked over to me. Ms. West, what are you doing in a place like this? Her gaze dropped to my food carrier, and she chuckled lightly. Have you brought lunch for Nolan? He has a sensitive stomach and can't handle anything too greasy. I looked seriously at the broth I'd made. It's chicken soup, and it isn't greasy. I skimmed the fat. Celia took a step closer and lowered her voice. Ms. West, I think there are a few things you're not getting here. Right now is the hardest time in Nolan's life. What he needs is someone who can help him get back on his feet, not some clingy little ornament who can only make broth. I thought about what to say for 3 whole seconds. But he's doing manual labor right now. That takes strength, not making a comeback. I paused, then added. And I'm not a clingy ornament. I can make my own money. I just haven't figured it out yet. The comments were stunned. Celia just got roasted into speechlessness. Lyra's logic is always this bizarre, yet it's also somehow impossible to argue with. Just as the atmosphere turned awkward and tense, Nolan walked out of the construction site. His work clothes were covered in dust, and there were band-aids all over his hands. He had sweat on his forehead. When he saw us, he visibly froze. Celia immediately went up to him. Nolan, I brought you lunch. But Nolan walked straight toward me instead, his brows furrowing. Why are you here? There's too much dust. I held up the food carrier and the bag of medical supplies. I brought you soup and medical supplies. Something shifted in his eyes. His fingers trembled slightly as he took the things from me. Celia's face went pale. Nolan, I came here for you. He turned to her, his voice polite but distant as he said, Miss Sanders, thank you for your kindness, but I don't need it. Please don't come again. With that, Nolan murmured to me, I'll take you home. He completely ignored Celia, who'd frozen in place. We sat in silence in the back of a cab. I glanced at the band-aids on his hands and suddenly said, Your wounds have dust in them. They're going to get infected. He pulled them back a little. I'm fine. Slowly, I said. Celia said you two are moving in together. Nolan snapped his head toward me. She's talking nonsense. His voice was sharp and edged with a rare anger. Then he realized he'd lost his cool and softened his tone, explaining, There's nothing between her and me. I'm living in the dorms at the construction site. I let out a hum and didn't say anything else. Comments floated out in front of me. Wait, are we ever going to find out why Nolan gets so rich later? Does any other male lead have it as rough as he does? I'm speechless. The cab pulled up to the villa. Before I got out, Nolan suddenly said, Don't worry about the money. Just use it, and tell me if it's not enough. His eyes were bloodshot, but his gaze was steady. I nodded, remembering I had a prenatal checkup tomorrow. After taking a couple of steps, I turned back. Will you be working tomorrow? Yeah, he said. Okay, you can get back to your stuff now. With that, I headed straight into the villa. Before bed that night, I got a text from an unknown number. Leave Nolan. You're not good enough for him. I stared at it for a moment, then lazily typed back. Are you Celia? You sent the message to the wrong person. I'm his ex-wife. Then I blocked the number, turned off my phone, and went to sleep. Early the next morning, I went to the hospital by myself. I registered, waited in line, and waited to be called. The morning sickness was worse that day. By the time they drew my blood, my face had gone white. After the ultrasound, the doctor said I was slightly anemic and prescribed iron supplements. I left the exam room, holding the folder with my results and feeling dizzy. I just wanted to find somewhere to sit down, but when I looked up, I saw a crowd gathered near the emergency room. I spotted Nolan in the middle of that crowd. He was sitting in a chair in the ER, his left hand wrapped in gauze. Celia stood next to him, bending over as she talked to him. She was holding a cotton swab, trying to dab at the scrapes on his face, but he turned his head away to avoid her. She wouldn't give up and reached out to grab his shoulder. They were intimate enough that they caught the onlookers' attention. I stood where I was and watched them. The comments exploded. Holy crap. Drama alert. Nolan got hurt saving a co-worker at the construction site. Celia heard about it real quick. See how soon she showed up. Wait, I got it. I know why Nolan ends up rich later. I was just about to see what the rest of the comments said when I heard Nolan's voice ring out from in front of me. Lyra. I looked up and saw him shaking Celia off before striding toward me. She tried to grab him again, but he flung her off. He walked fast, taking only a few strides to get to me. He lowered his gaze and caught sight of the folder in my hands. Printed on the front in big, clear letters were the words obstetrics and gynecology. Then he looked up at me, taking in how pale and weak I looked. His whole body went rigid. As his gaze traveled between the folder and my face, his eyes slowly turned bloodshot. His Adam's apple bobbed hard. When he finally spoke, his voice was so hoarse it almost wouldn't come out. Are you pregnant? I blinked, trying to remember if I'd forgotten to tell him. I'd meant to ask him to come with me to that day's prenatal checkup, but he had to go to work. At my silence, Nolan's lips began to quiver. He lifted his left hand, his fingers shaking badly. He didn't dare touch me though. His voice was broken and raw with despair as he asked, "Did you get rid of our baby?" He asked if I got rid of our baby. I stood there, watching the sheer devastation crack his features. My brain took its usual 3 seconds to process the heavy emotion radiating off of him. Then, I slowly lifted the folder and pulled out the grainy black and white ultrasound photo, pressing it flat against his chest. Why would I get rid of it? I asked, genuinely confused. I'm just a little anemic. The doctor said I need to eat more spinach and take iron supplements. Nolan completely froze. He didn't blink. He barely even seemed to breathe. His bloodshot eyes slowly dropped from my face to the little ultrasound picture, pressed against his dusty work shirt. His trembling left hand, the one wrapped in fresh gauze, hovered over the paper as if he were afraid touching it would make it disappear. The comments instantly filled my vision. System rebooting. 99%. Mr. Steele has encountered a fatal error. Press F to pay respects to his sanity. He literally stopped breathing. Lyra, tell him to breathe. It's about the size of a blueberry right now, I added, pointing to a dark smudge on the image. The doctor said it has a heartbeat. A choked, broken sound escaped Nolan's throat. He reached out with his uninjured right hand and gently gripped my wrist, his thumb brushing over my pulse. Baby, he whispered, his voice cracking entirely. Our baby. You didn't. You're keeping it. Of course I am. I already told it yesterday that you were off to be someone else's dad, but I guess I can retract that statement, I said smoothly. Celia, who had been completely ignored until this moment, finally snapped. He lunged forward, her pristine high heels clicking sharply against the hospital floor. Nolan, are you actually buying this? Her voice was shrill, losing all of its previous elegant veneer. She handed you divorce papers. She let you leave the house. And now, the second you get hurt, she conveniently shows up. Pregnant? How do you even know it's yours? I tilted my head, looking at Celia. I didn't hand him the papers. He handed them to me. And we didn't sign them yet because there were too many words. Also, unless I suddenly developed the ability to reproduce via cellular mitosis, it's definitely his. The comments went crazy. Cellular mitosis. I am dead. Lyra's deadpan logic strikes again. Celia looks like she just swallowed a whole lemon. Nolan didn't even look at Celia. His gaze hardened, the vulnerability from a moment ago vanishing into a cold, terrifying glare as he turned his head just enough to address her. Ms. Sanders, if you ever speak to my wife that way again, I don't care who your family is. I will ruin you. Celia physically recoiled, her face draining of color. Nolan, I'm just looking out for you. I was the one who rushed here when you got hurt. And I didn't ask you to. Nolan cut her off ruthlessly. I saved a coworker from a falling beam. The foreman called the ambulance. I have absolutely no idea how you found out, but your presence here is crossing a line. We are not friends. We are nothing. Leave. Before Celia could stammer out another excuse, a breathless voice echoed down the corridor. Mr. Steele. Mr. Steele, wait. A middle-aged man in an impeccably tailored suit was jogging toward us, followed closely by 2 bodyguards and a younger man whose arm was in a sling. The comments instantly lit up like fireworks. Here we go. The plot twist. That's Arthur Vance, the chairman of Vance Enterprises. The guy whose life Nolan saved at the site is Arthur Vance's only son, Leo. He was doing a grassroots internship in disguise. So this is how he gets his starting capital back. Arthur Vance stopped in front of Nolan, panting heavily. He grabbed Nolan's uninjured hand with both of his. Mr. Steele, I just heard from Leo. If you hadn't shoved him out of the way of that scaffolding, I don't even want to think about it. You saved my son's life. Nolan, though slightly taken aback, immediately slipped back into his old, composed CEO demeanor. Even in dusty clothes, he had a natural authority. It was instinct, Mr. Vance. Anyone would have done it. Nonsense, Arthur insisted. I know who you are, Nolan Steele. I know your company was recently dismantled due to that hostile takeover by your uncle. I was actually following the case. To see a man of your caliber working manual labor and still risking your life for a stranger? It speaks volumes of your character. Arthur pulled out a sleek black business card and pressed it into Nolan's hand. Call me tomorrow. I have a venture capital fund that needs someone with your exact expertise. Consider the funding unlimited. I stood there, watching the interaction. Oh, so he didn't go bankrupt because he was bad at business. His uncle set him up. My brain dutifully filed that information away for later. Nolan looked down at the card, then back at me. Thank you, Mr. Vance. But if You'll excuse me, I need to take my wife home. She's pregnant and slightly anemic. Arthur beamed. Congratulations. Go. Family first. We will speak tomorrow. Celia was standing off to the side, her eyes wide with shock as she realized Nolan was about to bounce back to the top of the food chain in record time. He took a step toward him. Nolan, I let out a soft yawn, rubbing my eyes. Nolan, my head feels dizzy. It wasn't a lie. The hospital smelled like bleach, and my morning sickness was starting to act up again. Nolan immediately dropped everything. He stepped squarely in front of Celia, blocking her entirely from my view, wrapped his good arm around my waist and gently guided me toward the exit. I've got you, he murmured softly. Let's go home. The cab ride back to the villa was quiet. Nolan sat rigidly next to me, his right hand tightly clutching the ultrasound photo, while his injured left hand rested carefully on his knee. He kept glancing at my stomach, which was completely flat under my loose dress, as if expecting it to suddenly balloon into a basketball. Does your hand hurt? I asked, looking at the gauze. No, he said instantly. Then after a pause he added, a little, but it doesn't matter. You shouldn't go back to the construction site, I told him, perfectly serious. You only have one good hand right now. If you try to carry bricks, you'll walk in a circle. Nolan stared at me for a moment, and then a low, genuine laugh escaped his chest. It was the first time I'd heard him laugh in weeks. The heavy, suffocating gloom that had been hanging over him since the bankruptcy seemed to shatter completely. You're right, he said softly. No more construction site. I'll call Mr. Vance tomorrow. When we got back to the villa, Nolan didn't head for the guest room. He followed me straight into the master bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, kicking off my shoes. Nolan knelt in front of me, taking my feet and gently slipping my slippers on. The comments were floating by lazily now. Look at this domestic bliss. My heart is melting. He is such a golden retriever for her. Wait, hasn't Lyra still not asked about the substitute thing? Right. The comments reminded me. I looked down at the crown of his dark hair. Celia said you got drunk 3 years ago because she left the country and that I'm just a replacement for her, because I have the same hair color. Nolan's hands froze on my ankles. His head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. Lyra, no. That's a complete lie. Oh, I said. Okay. Why did you get drunk then? Nolan swallowed hard. He shifted his weight, sitting back on his heels, looking up at me like I was a judge about to hand down a life sentence. Celia and I were neighbors as kids, he said, his voice steady but tense. Our parents joked about us, but I never felt anything for her. 3 years ago, I was at a charity gala. I saw you. I blinked. I wasn't at a charity gala 3 years ago. You were working as a server for the catering company, he corrected gently. You accidentally dropped a tray of champagne glasses, and instead of crying, you just stood there and calculated out loud how many months of rent the glasses cost. I thought you were the most fascinating person I'd ever seen. My brain clicked. I did remember that. The glasses had cost me $300. I spent the whole night trying to work up the courage to talk to you, Nolan continued, a faint flush creeping up his neck. But then I saw you talking to one of the male models at the event. You were laughing. I thought you were together. I got jealous, went to the bar, and drank way too much. The male model was asking me for directions to the bathroom. I stated. Nolan closed his eyes, a pained smile touching his lips. I figured that out the next morning, when I woke up in your apartment, and you were just sitting there, eating cereal, staring at me. I realized the universe had literally dropped my dream right into my lap. I panicked. I blurted out, let's get married, because I was terrified you would kick me out and I'd never see you again. I processed this information. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. So, I concluded. You didn't marry me because I looked like Celia. Celia actually cut her hair to look like mine. The comments went feral. Lyra's logic is flawless. Plot twist, Celia is the stand-in. Get her, Lyra. Nolan looked confused for a second, then nodded firmly. I don't care what Celia does with her hair. I only care about you. He reached up, resting his hand against my cheek. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone. When I lost the company, I thought I lost the right to take care of you. I didn't want you to suffer through poverty with me. The divorce, it killed me, Lyra. But I thought I was doing the right thing for you. I leaned my face into his palm. But you cook better than I do. If you leave, I have to make my own broth, and I forgot to put salt in it yesterday. Please, don't divorce me. Nolan's eyes welled with tears again. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against my knees. Never, he choked out. I will never leave you again. I swear. On my life. The next 3 months passed in a blur of aggressive upward mobility and excessive pampering. True to his word, Nolan met with Arthur Vance. Armed with Vance's unlimited capital and his own cutthroat business acumen, Nolan dismantled his traitorous uncle's grip on the Steele family assets within weeks. It was a bloodbath in the corporate world, but at home, Nolan was entirely focused on whether I was getting enough folic acid. Lyra, the grapes are seedless, but I cut them in half anyway just in case. Nolan announced, walking into the living room with a crystal bowl. He was back. In his custom-tailored suits, his watch alone worth more than the villa, but he still insisted on wearing a pink floral apron over his clothes when he was in the kitchen. I popped a grape into my mouth. Thank you. Did you fire your uncle today? I bought out his remaining shares at a fraction of the cost, forced him into early retirement, and sent him to a subsidiary in Antarctica. Yes, Nolan said, casually, sitting next to me and resting a hand on my slightly rounded belly. Did he kick today? Just once when I sneezed. I reported. The comments floated across my vision. They were much less frequent these days. Mostly just sticking around to watch the cozy aftermath. Antarctica. Nolan is ruthless to everyone but his wife. I love how she asks about corporate sabotage like she's asking about the weather. Wait guys, look at the news. Celia's family is bankrupt. I paused mid-grape. I tapped my phone to open the local business news. Sure enough, the Sanders family had over-leveraged their assets to try and compete with Nolan's new conglomerate, Vance Steele Holdings. They had collapsed overnight. Did you do this? I asked, showing Nolan the screen. Nolan barely glanced at it. They made bad investments. I simply didn't throw them a life preserver. Ms. Sanders has been trying to contact my assistant for a week. I had her number blocked. Just as he said that, the doorbell rang. Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper Nolan had hired so I wouldn't have to lift a finger, opened the door. From the entryway, a shrill, hysterical voice echoed into the house. Let me see him. Nolan. Nolan, you owe me an explanation. I sighed, putting the bowl of grapes down. Why is she always yelling? It's bad. For the baby. Nolan's face instantly turned glacial. He stood up, smoothing his tie, the pink apron disappearing as he tossed it onto an armchair. I will handle this. Stay here. No, I said, standing up slowly. I need to walk anyway. The doctor said light exercise is good. I waddled out behind Nolan to the grand foyer. Celia was struggling against the security guards Nolan had stationed at the gates, who had followed her up the driveway. Her hair was a mess, her designer clothes wrinkled, and the arrogant White Lotus persona was entirely gone. When she saw Nolan, she burst into tears. Nolan, please. My family lost everything. You have to help us. We grew up together. Nolan stood at the top of the steps, exuding a terrifying, cold authority. Ms. Sanders, I warned you months ago that if you ever disrespected my wife again, I would ruin you. Consider this me keeping my promise. Security, remove her from the property. Wait, I said, stepping up next to Nolan. Celia's eyes darted to me, flashing with a momentary, desperate hope. Lyra, please. You know what it's like to have nothing. Tell him to show mercy. I looked at her. I thought about the first time she had stood at my gate, holding that picture, telling me I was just a stand-in. I thought about how she tried to touch Nolan at the hospital. I do know what it's like to have nothing, I said calmly. When Nolan had nothing, he went to a construction site to carry steel beams so he could send me money. Why don't you try that? I hear manual labor builds character. Celia stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The comments absolutely erupted. Fatality. Lyra dropping the mic with a completely straight face. She didn't even yell, she just gave practical career advice. I am howling. Also, I added, tapping my chin. You owe me a hairpin. The comments said you stole mine in high school. Celia went completely rigid. How? How could you possibly know about the butterfly hairpin? Lucky guess. I lied smoothly. Security, you can take her away now. Her voice is making the baby kick. Nolan wrapped an arm around me, completely ignoring Celia's wails as she was dragged down the driveway. He looked down at me, a mixture of awe and deep affection in his eyes. You are terrifyingly practical, Mrs. Steele. I try, I said, leaning against his shoulder. Can we go back inside? I want the rest of the grapes. 6 months later, the delivery room was chaotic, but not because of the medical staff. It was entirely because Nolan was having a panic attack. Her heart rate is elevating, Nolan said frantically, pointing a trembling finger at the monitor. He was wearing scrubs that were slightly too tight, his face completely pale. Doctor, is that normal? Why is she sweating? Can I take her place? Can you do an epidural on me instead? Nolan, I said, gripping his hand tightly. You cannot give birth. You lack the necessary organs. I know, but you're in pain, he choked out, pressing his forehead against the back of my hand. I was in pain. The contractions were definitely not fun, but my brain's natural delay system was actually helping me stay relatively calm. I just squeezed his hand harder. The comments were floating lazily across the ceiling of the delivery room. Mr. Steele is losing his mind. I rate his panic October 10th. Hang in there, Lyra. The baby is almost here. This is the last time we'll be able to tune in. The main plot is resolved. We're so happy for you guys. I blinked at the last comment. The last time? I suppose it made sense. The crisis was over. Nolan was safe, we were safe, and the drama was resolved. I realized, with a strange sense of peace, that I wouldn't miss the floating text. I had reality right here holding my hand. 2 hours later, a loud, healthy cry echoed through the room. It's a boy, the doctor announced gently. Nolan was openly sobbing. He didn't even try to hide it. He kissed my sweaty forehead over and over again, murmuring my name like a prayer. When the nurse wrapped the baby in a blanket and placed him on my chest, Nolan gently rested his large hand over the tiny bundle. He looks like you, Nolan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I looked down at the red, wrinkled little potato. He looks like an angry raisin, I corrected. But he has your nose. Nolan laughed, a wet, joyful sound, and leaned down to kiss me softly on the lips. Thank you, Lyra. For everything. For keeping me. For not signing that paper. I smiled, feeling heavier and sleepier by the second. You're the one who stopped my hand. The weather was perfect on the day we renewed our vows. 3 years after the day Nolan drunkenly asked me to marry him, we were doing it right. No hazy apartment, no impulsive nodding. Van Steele Holdings had rented out an entire private island. The guest list was small, just close friends, Arthur Vance, some loyal executives, and Mrs. Higgins, who was currently holding our 1-year-old son Leo, named after Arthur's son, which had made the older man cry for 20 minutes. I stood in front of the mirror in the bridal suite, adjusting my veil. My mind felt perfectly clear. The ditzy haze that used to cloud my thoughts had vanished. Somewhere between Nolan's comeback and late-night diaper changes, I looked at the space in front of my eyes. No comments. Nothing but the beautiful, quiet reality of my life. Nolan walked into the room, already dressed in a sharp black tuxedo. He stopped in his tracks when he saw me, his eyes instantly turning a little red. You're not allowed to cry yet, I told him reasonably. The ceremony hasn't started. You'll ruin your photos. He walked over, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind and resting his chin on my shoulder, looking at our reflection. I can't help it. I still feel like I'm dreaming. I keep waiting to wake up in that dusty construction dorm. Without you. I turned around in his arms and looked up at him. I reached out, gently tapping his chest right over his heart. You're not dreaming, Nolan. We're rich again. You're handsome, we have a baby, and you are officially out of excuses to ever hand me a piece of paper I don't understand. He smiled, that soft, completely devoted smile that belonged only to me. Only. Blank checks from now on, he promised, leaning down to kiss me. I love you, Lyra. I kissed him back, feeling the warmth of his hands, no longer calloused by bricks but still just as steady as the day he offered to let me go. I love you too, I said. Now let's go get married. Again.